Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a forgotten valley, hidden between black forests and freezing rivers, where travelers once whispered about a town that vanished in a single night. No battle, no plague, no warning bells echoing through the streets. One evening, the chimneys still smoked beneath the winter sky, and by sunrise, every soul inside the town was gone. Before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these slow, mysterious journeys into forgotten history. And now, dim the lights, settle into bed, maybe grab a blanket, and let us wander together into the cold silence of a place the maps no longer remember. The year was 1683, though in the valley of Edrith, years mattered less than seasons. Winters lasted too long there. Snow gathered on rooftops like layers of pale ash, and the mountains surrounding the settlement blocked the sun earlier each evening. Travelers crossing the northern roads often hurried their horses when passing through the valley, because darkness arrived strangely fast beneath those cliffs. The town itself was called Velmora. It sat beside the frozen banks of the river Alvin, a slow black river that moved like oil beneath sheets of cracking ice. Velmora was not large. Barely 200 people lived there during the cold months. Yet, for traders traveling between the western ports and inland kingdoms, the town was an important resting place. Its stables were warm. Its bread was famous for surviving long journeys without spoiling. And most importantly, the people of Velmora never asked too many questions. At least, that was what outsiders believed. On the final winter before the town disappeared, strange things had already begun happening across the valley. It started with the birds. The children noticed first. Every morning before dawn, enormous flocks of black crows circled above the church tower. Hundreds of them gathered there, screaming into the freezing air. Farmers threw stones at them. Boys fired slingshots. The priest even climbed onto the chapel roof to ring the bells in hopes of scaring them away. Nothing worked. The birds always returned. Worse still, they never landed anywhere else in town. Only the church tower. Old Marta, who lived near the grain mill, claimed the crows were trying to warn them about something beneath the earth. Most villagers ignored her because Marta had survived 3 husbands and spoke to herself while collecting firewood. But people still listened carefully whenever she muttered warnings. Very old people frightened others for reasons nobody fully understood, especially during winter. One evening, as snow drifted through the streets like pale smoke, a young stable boy named Tomas hurried through the market square carrying sacks of oats. He was 16 years old, thin from constant work, and possessed the sort of quiet face people rarely remembered afterward. He lived in a small room above the inn with his uncle Garrick, who owned the stables beside the northern gate. Tomas disliked the crows more than anyone. Every morning, their cries dragged him awake before sunrise. He claimed they sounded almost human from a distance. That night, while crossing the empty square, Tomas noticed something strange near the frozen fountain. Footprints, bare footprints. At first, he thought they belonged to a drunk, wandering home from the tavern. But after kneeling closer, he realized the tracks were far too small for a grown man. They looked like a child's feet pressed directly into the snow, except no child could survive barefoot in weather that cold. The tracks crossed the square slowly, weaving around market stalls before disappearing toward the church. Tomas stared after them for several moments. The wind moved softly through the empty streets. Then, somewhere beyond the rooftops, a crow screamed. He left the oats beside the stable doors and hurried after the footprints. The church of St. Edwin stood on the highest hill in Velmora, overlooking the entire valley. During daylight, it appeared peaceful enough, though badly weathered. The stone walls leaned slightly from age, and cracks split the bell tower from years of ice freezing inside the masonry. But at night, the church looked entirely different. Dark, watching, the footprints led directly toward the heavy wooden doors. Tomas stopped halfway up the hill. A lantern glowed faintly inside the church. That alone was unusual. Father Benrick always extinguished every candle before sleeping. He often lectured villagers about wasting lamp oil during harsh winters. Yet now pale golden light flickered behind the stained windows. The boy climbed the final steps carefully. As he approached the doors, he heard voices inside. Not conversation, singing, low voices drifting together slowly, almost too soft to understand. Tomas hesitated. Then he pushed the door open slightly. Warm air rolled outward, carrying the smell of incense and melted wax. Inside the chapel, nearly 20 townspeople stood facing the altar with their backs turned toward him. Men, women, even several children. All of them stood perfectly still while Father Benrick whispered something from the front of the room. Tomas immediately noticed what frightened him most. Nobody moved naturally. The people swayed slightly side to side, almost like sleepwalkers, and their eyes, every face stared upward toward the ceiling. Tomas could not understand why. He followed their gaze. Above the altar hung the massive wooden statue of St. Edwin, carved over a century earlier by craftsmen from the southern kingdoms. Normally, the saint's face looked calm and welcoming. Tonight it looked different. Dark streaks ran beneath the statue's eyes. For one terrible moment, Tomas thought the wood itself was bleeding. A floorboard creaked beneath his boot. Instantly, the singing stopped. 20 heads turned toward him at once. No one spoke. The silence inside the church felt enormous. Father Benrick stepped forward slowly, candlelight trembling across his face. He was an old man with deep wrinkles and white hair that hung loosely around his shoulders. Usually, his expression carried kindness. Not tonight. Tonight, he looked exhausted. "Tomas," he said softly, "why are you here?" The stable boy swallowed hard. "I saw tracks in the snow," Father Benrick glanced toward the others behind him, then back to Tomas. "You should go home." The strange stillness in the chapel made the boy's stomach tighten. Some of the villagers continued staring upward, even after turning around. One little girl stood barefoot on the cold stone floor, her pale feet blackened with frost. Tomas recognized her immediately. Elsa Weaver. She had disappeared 3 days earlier. Everyone in town had been searching the forests for her. Yet here she stood silently inside the church, as though nothing had happened. "Elsa," Tomas whispered. The little girl slowly turned her head toward him. Her lips moved slightly. "The river sings at night," she murmured. Then she smiled. Tomas backed away immediately. Something was terribly wrong here. Father Benrick approached him carefully. "You must leave now," the priest said quietly. "And you must not speak about this." But Elsa vanished. She returned safely. That is all anyone needs to know. The old priest's voice sounded calm, but fear hid beneath it, like cracks beneath ice. Tomas noticed his hands shaking. Outside, the wind howled against the chapel walls. Somewhere high above, hundreds of crows erupted into screaming cries again. The priest suddenly grabbed Tomas by the arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Listen to me carefully," Father Benrick whispered. "If you hear knocking at your door after midnight, do not answer it." The lantern flames flickered violently. Then every candle inside the church extinguished at once. Darkness swallowed the room. People gasped. Children began crying softly somewhere near the altar. Tomas tore free from the priest and stumbled backward toward the entrance. He pushed through the doors into the freezing night air and nearly slipped on the icy steps while running downhill. Behind him, the church bells began ringing wildly, not in rhythm, not like any proper call to prayer. The bells crashed together in frantic, uneven bursts that echoed through the valley. Windows opened across town. Dogs barked. Lanterns appeared behind shutters. Tomas reached the inn breathless and slammed the stable doors shut behind him. His uncle Garrick emerged carrying a candle. What in God's name happened? "The church," Tomas gasped. "Something's wrong inside the church." Garrick frowned immediately. The older man had lived his entire life in Velmora, and unlike most villagers, he rarely frightened easily. But the moment he heard the bells, his face lost color. Without another word, he crossed the stable and shoved thick wooden beams across the doors. Then he locked every window. Tomas stared at him. "What are you doing?" Garrick did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the fireplace and threw another log into the flames. Only after the room brightened slightly did he finally speak. "When I was a boy," he said quietly, "my father told me something about this valley." The wind rattled the shutters outside. "The mountains here were empty once," Garrick continued. "No towns, no farms, nothing. Travelers avoided this place because people kept disappearing near the river." Tomas felt cold despite the fire. Disappearing. His uncle nodded slowly. They said voices came from beneath the ice during winter. The bells continued ringing outside. Louder now. Faster. Then suddenly, they stopped. Complete silence settled across Velmora. No dogs barking. No shouting. Even the wind seemed gone. Tomas looked toward the frost-covered windows uneasily, and somewhere outside, far beyond the stable walls, 3 slow knocks echoed through the darkness. The knocking came again. 3 slow taps. Not loud, not desperate, almost polite. Tomas froze beside the fireplace, while Garrick stared toward the stable doors without blinking. The older man's weathered face had turned pale beneath the candlelight. Neither of them moved. Outside, the town remained silent. That silence felt wrong more than frightening. Velmora was never truly quiet. Even in the dead of winter, there were always sounds drifting through the streets. Horses stamping in stables, shutters creaking, distant arguments from the tavern, coughing from neighboring homes. Now there was nothing, only those 3 knocks. Garrick slowly lifted one finger toward his lips, warning Tomas not to speak. The boy nodded. Another pause followed. Then came the sound of footsteps moving across the snow outside the inn. Crunchy, crunchy, crunchy. Whoever stood beyond the door walked slowly toward the street again. The footsteps faded into the darkness until even they disappeared. Tomas released a shaky breath. "Who was that?" he whispered. Garrick did not answer immediately. He kept staring toward the door, as though expecting something worse to return. Finally, he crossed the room and pulled the curtains tighter across the windows. "When midnight callers come," he murmured quietly, "you pretend the house is empty." Tomas frowned. "What does that mean?" His uncle lowered himself heavily into a chair near the fire. "It means," he said, "that people in this valley once believed something walked through the streets during deep winter. Something that searched for invitations." The flames cracked softly between them. Tomas tried to laugh, but the sound never fully escaped his throat. "You don't actually believe that?" "No," Garrick replied quickly, but he answered too quickly. Outside, snow continued drifting against the walls. The stable horses had grown restless, stomping nervously in their stalls. Tomas could hear them snorting softly through the wooden floorboards overhead. Then, from somewhere farther down the street, another knock echoed through the night. 3 slow taps again. A dog suddenly began barking wildly in the distance. Its barking turned into whining. Then silence returned. Tomas swallowed hard. Maybe someone needs help. Garrick slammed his hand against the table hard enough to make the candle jump. "No." The sharpness in his voice startled both of them. The older man closed his eyes briefly before speaking again in a calmer tone. "You stay inside tonight." The fire burned lower as the hours crawled forward. Neither man slept. Garrick sharpened an old hunting knife beside the hearth, while Tomas sat listening to the wind scrape snow against the walls. Several times they heard movement outside. Footsteps, dragging noises. Once what sounded like quiet singing, drifting somewhere beyond the stable yard. Near dawn, the noises finally stopped. Exhaustion slowly overcame Tomas, and sometime before sunrise, he drifted into uneasy sleep beside the fire. He dreamed of the church, only now the chapel stood empty beneath moonlight, while black water flowed across the floor between the pews. The statue of Saint Edwin faced the wall instead of the congregation, and behind him, someone whispered his name. When Tomas awoke, pale morning light filtered through the shutters. The fire had nearly died. Garrick was gone. For a moment, the boy thought perhaps the night's terror had only been some strange dream caused by exhaustion. Then he noticed the heavy wooden beams still locked across the doors, and the knife lying beside the chair. Tomas stood quickly. The town outside seemed strangely still. Normally, the streets of Velmora came alive before dawn. Bakers lit ovens. Farmers prepared wagons. Smoke rose from chimneys across the valley. This morning, only a few thin trails of smoke reached the sky. The stable felt colder than usual. Tomas crossed the room and cautiously unbarred the door. A gust of freezing air swept inside. The street beyond lay buried beneath fresh snow. Empty, too empty. He stepped outside carefully. No voices greeted the morning. No wagon wheels creaked across the square. Even stranger, many doors throughout town stood slightly open, as though people had left in a hurry. "Uncle," Tomas called. No response came. His boots crunched loudly across the snow while he moved toward the market square. Every sound echoed strangely beneath the mountains. The square itself looked abandoned. Stalls stood unattended. A basket of frozen apples had spilled across the street during the night. The blacksmith's furnace had gone cold. Tomas spotted movement near the well. An old woman knelt in the snow, muttering prayers beneath her breath. It was Marta, the same old widow who claimed the crows brought warnings. "Tomas," she whispered without looking up, "you shouldn't be outside. What happened here?" Marta finally raised her head slowly. Her eyes looked terrified. They came knocking. A cold sensation crawled across Tomas's shoulders. Who? But the old woman only shook her head repeatedly. "Too late now," she murmured. "Too late." Then she resumed, whispering prayers to herself. Tomas backed away uneasily. Something was wrong with the town. Very wrong. He hurried toward the inn across the square. Hopping Garrick had simply gone searching for supplies. But as he approached the building, he stopped cold. The front door stood wide open. Snow had drifted halfway across the floor inside. "Uncle." Silence answered him. The dining hall looked abandoned mid-meal. Wooden cups remained scattered across tables. A bowl of stew had frozen solid near the fireplace. One chair lay overturned beside the stairs. Tomas climbed upward, quickly toward their room. Empty. The blankets remained untouched. Garrick's coat was missing. So was the hunting knife. The boy's pulse quickened. He searched the rest of the inn-room by room. Every chamber stood deserted. Several travelers' belongings remained behind boots, bags, even coins scattered across a table upstairs. No one abandoned money willingly, unless they left very fast, or unless they never intended to return. Outside, a church bell rang once. Only once. The sound echoed across the valley like a warning. Tomas hurried back into the street. People were finally emerging from their homes now, though slowly and nervously. Groups gathered together, whispering anxiously. Several villagers cried openly. A man stumbled through the square, shouting his wife's name. Another woman searched beneath wagons, while clutching a lantern despite the daylight. More people were missing. Tomas pushed through the growing crowd until he reached the bakery near the southern road. There he found Elias Mercer, one of the town guards, speaking urgently with several farmers. Elias looked exhausted. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. "Tomas," he said immediately. "Have you seen Father Benrick?" "No." The guard cursed quietly. "The priest is gone." A chill ran through the crowd nearby. "Gone where?" someone asked. Elias shook his head. "Nobody knows." The church caretaker had vanished too, and Elsa Weaver, and half a dozen others. Tomas hesitated before speaking again. "I saw Elsa last night." Every face turned toward him. The square suddenly felt very still. "Where?" Elias demanded. "In the church." Murmurs spread through the crowd immediately. One old man crossed himself. What was she doing there? Another villager asked nervously. Tomas thought carefully. He remembered the child's pale face, the strange smile. "The river sings at night," he whispered. Several people recoiled at those words. Elias grabbed Tomas firmly by the shoulder. "Tell me everything." So Tomas described the chapel, the singing, the villagers staring upward, the statue stained with dark streaks beneath its eyes. When he finished speaking, silence settled across the group. No one laughed. No one dismissed the story. That frightened Tomas more than anything else. Elias looked toward the church hill. "We're going there." 5 men armed themselves with axes and lanterns, despite the daylight. Tomas followed closely behind, while the others muttered prayers under their breath. The climb toward St. Edwin's Church felt colder than the rest of town. Wind swept fiercely across the hilltop, carrying flurries of snow through the graveyard stones. The crows had returned. Hundreds perched across the roof and bell tower, watching. As the group approached, the birds began shrieking violently. Elias pushed open the chapel doors. The smell hit them first. Not blood, river water, cold, damp air rolled from the darkness inside. The church floor was flooded, only an inch deep perhaps, but enough to cover the stone beneath the pews. Lantern light flickered across black water, and every candle inside the chapel had melted completely down to the holders. Tomas stared toward the altar. The statue of Saint Edwin was gone. Only empty chains remained hanging above the flooded floor. One of the men whispered a curse. Then someone noticed the footprints, wet footprints crossing through the chapel water toward a narrow wooden door behind the altar, the priest's private chambers. Elias drew his knife. Slowly, the men approached the door. Tomas followed despite his fear. The wooden door creaked open. Inside the chamber, freezing air spilled outward from an open window overlooking the valley cliffs. Snow blew across the floor. Father Benrick knelt beside the window, motionless. At first, Tomas thought the priest was praying. Then Elias stepped closer and quietly said, "God help us." The old priest was dead, but that was not the worst part. Father Benrick's hands were frozen solid around the neck of the missing statue of Saint Edwin, and both the priest and the wooden saint were staring directly toward the river below. No one spoke for several long seconds. Wind hissed through the broken window, while snow drifted across the priest's frozen body. Father Benrick knelt stiffly beside the statue, as though he had died in the middle of a desperate prayer. The wooden face of Saint Edwin looked damaged now. Cracks split across its forehead. One carved eye had been gouged completely out. Tomas felt his stomach tighten. Elias slowly crouched beside the corpse. The guard captain removed one glove carefully and pressed trembling fingers against the priest's neck. Though everyone already knew the truth, frozen solid, dead for hours, yet something about the scene disturbed Tomas more deeply than death itself. Father Benrick's expression. The old priest did not look peaceful. He looked terrified. Elias stood again slowly. "We tell nobody about this," he said immediately. "What?" One farmer whispered. "How can we hide?" "We hide it because panic will spread through the town before sunset." The others exchanged nervous glances. Outside, the crows screamed louder. Tomas stared toward the open window overlooking the valley. Below the church hill, the river Ulven wound through the snow-covered forests like a black scar across the earth. Something moved down there. At first, he thought it was drifting fog. Then the shape disappeared behind the trees. Tomas, he blinked. Elias was watching him. "You saw something." The boy hesitated. "No," but he wasn't sure. The men wrapped Father Benrick's body in cloth taken from the chapel storage room. Nobody wished to touch the statue. In the end, Elias ordered it covered with blankets and locked inside the priest's chamber. Then they sealed the church entirely. Heavy chains were wrapped around the doors, while frightened villagers watched from below the hill. Questions spread quickly through Velmora after that. Where had the missing townspeople gone? Why had the priest died beside the statue? Why were the crows gathering in greater numbers each hour? By midday, nearly 17 people had vanished from the town. No signs of struggle, no blood, only empty homes and half-finished meals left behind. The mayor of Velmora, a broad-shouldered man named Orenvale, attempted calming the townspeople by claiming wolves had attacked during the night. Nobody believed him. Wolves did not unlatch doors or leave coins scattered across tables. Fear settled over the valley like another storm cloud. Shops closed early. Families nailed shutters across windows. Children were forbidden from leaving their homes. And all throughout the afternoon, the crows continued circling above the church tower. Tomas spent most of the day searching for Garrick. He checked the stables first. Nothing. Then the tavern, the mill, the blacksmith yard. Each place carried the same uneasy atmosphere, frightened whispers and locked doors. At sunset, he finally returned to the inn exhausted and half frozen. The common room remained empty except for Marta, the old widow, sitting beside the fireplace wrapped in blankets. Tomas stopped in surprise. "How did you get in here?" The door was open. She stared into the flames while speaking. Tomas frowned. "I locked it. Locks don't matter much anymore." The old woman's voice sounded distant. The boy crossed the room carefully. "You know something about this, don't you?" Marta smiled faintly without looking at him. "Everyone in this valley knows pieces of the story. Most just pretend not to." The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow fell harder now, tapping gently against the shutters. Tomas lowered himself into a chair across from her. "What story?" For a while, Marta remained silent. Then she finally spoke. Before Velmora existed, another settlement stood beside the river. Tomas listened carefully. The old settlement disappeared during a winter much like this one. Travelers arrived one morning and found the homes empty, fires still burning, livestock wandering freely. Not a single body anywhere. A cold shiver crept through Tomas's chest. What happened to them? No one knows. Marta's pale eyes reflected the firelight strangely. But afterward, people stopped crossing this valley after dark. They claimed voices whispered from beneath the frozen river at night. The boy remembered Elsa's words inside the church. "The river sings at night." Marta leaned closer. Then came Father Edwin, the saint. She nodded. He wasn't a saint then, just a wandering priest from the southern kingdoms. He arrived carrying a carved wooden idol and claiming God had shown him visions. Tomas frowned. An idol, the statue in the church. The fire popped loudly. Edwin believed something ancient lived beneath the valley ice. Something hungry. He said the disappearances were sacrifices. Tomas felt increasingly uneasy. "That's impossible." "Perhaps." Marta shrugged slowly. But Father Edwin built the church directly above the hill, because He believed holy ground would keep the things sleeping. The wind outside moaned softly through the alleyways. Tomas looked toward the dark windows, and now the old woman finally met his eyes fully. Now the church doors have opened again. A loud knock suddenly echoed downstairs. Both of them froze. 3 slow taps, the exact same knocking from the night before. Tomas stood immediately. Marta whispered something under her breath. The knocking came again. Tap, tap, tap. Not aggressive, patient. The boy moved cautiously toward the stairs. Don't, Marta said sharply. But Tomas ignored her. He reached the lower hallway slowly, heart hammering inside his chest. The inn entrance stood at the far end of the corridor, beneath hanging lanterns. Another knock sounded, closer now somehow. Tomas swallowed hard. Who's there? Silence answered him. Then came a voice. Soft, childlike. Tomas. His blood turned cold instantly. He knew that voice. Elsa Weaver, the missing girl. Tomas, the voice whispered again from beyond the door. Please help me. Marta appeared behind him, gripping the stair railing tightly. Do not open it, she hissed. But she's alive. No. The old woman's expression had become terrifyingly serious. That is not the child anymore. Outside the door, Elsa began crying softly. I'm cold. Tomas hesitated. Every instinct told him something was terribly wrong. Yet the voice sounded so real, so frightened. Please, Elsa whispered. It hurts. The boy slowly approached the entrance. Behind him, Marta began praying rapidly under her breath. Tomas placed one trembling hand against the wooden lock. Then he noticed something. Water, thin black water, slowly seeped beneath the bottom of the door. His hand jerked away immediately. The crying stopped at once. Silence filled the hallway. Then came laughter. Not loud, not human. A wet, rasping sound that seemed to echo from far below the earth itself. Marta screamed. The lanterns overhead extinguished instantly. Darkness swallowed the inn. Outside, the crows erupted into violent shrieking across the town. Tomas stumbled backward, while something scratched slowly against the other side of the door. Long scraping noises, like fingernails dragging across wood. Then came the voice again. Only now it sounded wrong. Too deep. Too many voices speaking together. Open the door. The scratching intensified violently. Wood splintered. Tomas grabbed a lantern desperately, while Marta continued praying upstairs. His shaking hands fumbled for flint in the darkness. The door suddenly bulged inward. Another scrape, another crack. Something outside was trying to force its way inside. Finally, the lantern ignited. Warm light burst across the hallway. Instantly, the scratching stopped. Complete silence followed. Tomas stood frozen, breathing hard. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped closer to the entrance. The black water beneath the door had vanished. No shadows moved outside. Nothing, only snow, drifting quietly through the empty street beyond the windows. Marta descended the stairs slowly, gripping a wooden cross around her neck. "It knows your name now," she whispered. Tomas turned toward her. "What was that?" The old woman looked close to tears. "When the valley hungers," she murmured, "it sends the lost ones back first." The fire upstairs had nearly died. Cold spread rapidly through the inn again, and somewhere far beyond the rooftops, deep near the riverbanks below the town, a distant sound echoed faintly through the winter night. Singing, hundreds of voices singing together beneath the ice. The singing continued long after midnight. At first it sounded distant, almost hidden beneath the wind. But as the hours passed, the voices grew clearer. Low, slow, melodic in a way that felt deeply unnatural. Tomas sat awake beside the inn fireplace, clutching the lantern tightly, while Marta whispered prayers from the corner of the room. Neither of them dared approach the windows. Outside, Velmora had sealed itself shut. No lights moved through the streets anymore. No laughter drifted from taverns. No wagon wheels groaned across frozen roads. Only that terrible singing carried through the valley. At some point before dawn, Tomas realized the melody never changed. The voices repeated the same notes again and again, without pause, as though trapped in an endless cycle beneath the earth. Toward morning, the sound finally faded. Exhaustion dragged heavily at Tomas's eyes, but fear kept sleep away. Every creak of the inn made him flinch. Then suddenly, a bell rang in the distance. One sharp toll. Marta stopped praying immediately. "They found someone," she whispered. Tomas rose quickly. Outside, pale gray dawn spread across the valley beneath thick clouds. Snow covered the streets in smooth, untouched layers, except for narrow trails where frightened townspeople now hurried toward the southern edge of Velmora. The boy followed them. Cold air bit through his coat while he pushed downhill beside the grain mill. People murmured anxiously ahead. When Tomas finally reached the crowd, he stopped cold. A body hung from the old river bridge, frozen above the black water below. Several villagers crossed themselves in horror. It was Elias Mercer. The guard captain swayed gently from a rope tied around the bridge arch, his boots dangling several feet above the ice. Frost coated his beard and eyelashes, but it was not the hanging itself that terrified the crowd. It was his face. Elias' mouth had been stitched shut with thick black thread, and carved into the wooden planks beneath him were 3 words: "He opianity it." No one moved closer. Even the strongest men in town stood pale and trembling. Mayor Oren finally forced himself forward with 2 farmers beside him. They lowered the body carefully, while others turned away, unable to watch. Tomas noticed something strange immediately. Elias' hands, both palms were badly burned, as though he had grabbed something extremely hot before dying. Who found him? Oren demanded. A fisherman near the back of the crowd raised one shaky hand. I heard splashing before sunrise, he muttered. Thought the ice was breaking. Another villager pointed nervously toward the river. There are footprints. Everyone turned. A trail of wet footprints crossed the snow beneath the bridge, leading toward the frozen riverbank. Bare footprints, small ones, child-sized, the same kind Tomas had seen near the church. Murmurs spread rapidly through the crowd. God protect us. It's the missing children. No, whispered someone else. It's worse. Mayor Oren's face darkened. Enough. But fear had already taken hold. Tomas stared toward the river. The black water beneath the bridge moved strangely today. Thick chunks of ice floated slowly past, despite the freezing temperatures. Steam rose faintly from the surface, like breath, and for just a moment, Tomas thought he saw shapes moving beneath the water. Human shapes, watching upward. He stepped back immediately. The crowd began dispersing quickly after Elias' body was removed. Nobody wished to remain near the river longer than necessary. Before leaving, however, Mayor Oren grabbed Tomas roughly by the shoulder. You, he said quietly, come with me. The mayor led him uphill through winding streets toward the town hall near the square. Snow drifted around them while distant crows circled overhead. Inside the hall, several older townspeople already waited around a long wooden table. Their expressions looked grim. Marta sat among them too. Tomas frowned. What is this? Mayor Oren closed the heavy doors behind them. It's time you heard the truth. The room smelled of candle wax and damp wood. Frost coated the windows from inside. Oren remained standing, while the others avoided Tomas's eyes. My grandfather told me something before he died, the mayor began quietly. Something every mayor of Velmora passes to the next. Tomas listened carefully. This town was never meant to exist. Silence filled the room. The first settlers who came here ignored every warning about the valley. Traders wanted a shorter northern route, so they built beside the river, despite the disappearances. Oren's tired face tightened. Then the vanishings started again. Marta stared into the candle, flames silently. The settlers begged Father Edwin for help, Oren continued. He believed the river itself was cursed, so he made an agreement. Tomas felt cold creep through his chest. What kind of agreement? No one answered immediately. Finally, Marta whispered, a sacrifice. The word hung heavily in the air. Oren nodded once. Every 13 winters, one chosen soul would be given to the valley. Tomas stared at them in disbelief. That's insane. It worked, another elder muttered. For over a century, Marta added softly. The room fell silent again. Tomas suddenly remembered Elsa Weaver disappearing days earlier, and the villagers inside the church. You were choosing someone. Nobody denied it. Anger surged through him immediately. You gave children to that thing. Mayor Oren slammed one fist against the table. You think we wanted this? The candles trembled. You're too young to remember the famine winters, the mayor growled. The sickness, the disappearances, entire families gone overnight. His voice lowered. When the sacrifices stopped years ago, the valley woke again. Tomas backed away from the table slowly. You're all mad. No, Marta whispered sadly. Only afraid. The old woman lifted tired eyes toward him. Father Benrick tried ending the pact. That is why he died. A horrible realization formed inside Tomas's mind. He opened the church. Oren nodded grimly. The priest removed the statue from the altar 3 nights ago. Why? Because he believed the valley had lied to us. Snow rattled softly against the windows. Marta folded trembling hands together. Benrick discovered old records hidden beneath the chapel. The sacrifices were never protecting Velmora. Tomas frowned. Then what were they doing? Nobody answered, and that silence frightened him more than anything spoken so far. Finally, Oren whispered, "Feeding it." The fire inside the hall crackled sharply. Tomas struggled to breathe evenly. Outside, distant crows screamed again. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Mayor Oren looked toward the frost-covered windows. "We don't know." The older man's voice sounded exhausted now. The oldest stories say something ancient sleeps beneath the river ice. Something trapped there long before the church existed. Marta continued softly. The sacrifices kept it weak, hungry, sleeping. And now, the mayor's face darkened. Now it wants more. A loud pounding suddenly erupted against the hall doors downstairs. Everyone jumped. Another pound followed immediately. Then shouting, panicked shouting. Oren rushed toward the entrance, while Tomas followed close behind. The moment they opened the doors, a terrified farmer stumbled inside, covered in snow. "It's the Weaver house," he gasped. "What happened?" The farmer's face had gone ghostly pale. They came back. Nobody needed to ask who. Within moments, the entire group hurried through the streets toward the eastern side of town. Villagers peered nervously from shuttered windows, while the wind carried loose snow through the alleys. As they approached the Weaver home, Tomas noticed dozens of people gathered outside already. No one dared enter. The front door hung open. Mayor Oren forced his way through the crowd. Inside the house, every candle had been extinguished. The room smelled strongly of river water. Tomas stepped carefully across the threshold and froze. Wet footprints covered the floor, dozens of them, small barefoot prints leading throughout the house. Toward the staircase upstairs, a woman sobbed quietly near the fireplace. Elsa, Weaver's mother. She was singing outside, the woman whispered brokenly. I heard her voice. Oren looked grim. What happened then? The woman pointed upward with shaking fingers. She asked to come inside. Nobody moved. The staircase creaked softly overhead. Every face turned upward. Another creak. Slow footsteps crossing the second floor. Tomas's pulse hammered painfully. Oren drew a knife from his coat. "Stay behind me." The mayor climbed the stairs slowly, while the others followed in terrified silence. Every board groaned beneath their weight. At the top of the staircase stood Elsa's bedroom door. Closed. From inside came the sound of quiet humming, the same melody Tomas had heard beneath the river. Oren pushed the door open. The room beyond was empty. No child, no movement, only frost coating the walls and windows. And written across the bedroom mirror in dripping black water were 4 chilling words. "The ice is thinning." Nobody spoke. The words on the mirror slowly dripped downward like ink mixed with melted snow. Black water slid across the glass and pooled on the wooden floor beneath the window. Tomas stared at the message, while cold spread through his entire body. "The ice is thinning." Mayor Oren stepped into the room carefully, knife still raised. His breath fogged heavily in the freezing air. "She's not here," one of the farmers whispered behind him. But Tomas was no longer certain. The humming had stopped the moment the door opened, yet the room still felt occupied somehow. Watching them, Marta slowly approached the mirror. Her wrinkled face looked exhausted beyond words. "It's happening faster now," she murmured. Oren turned sharply toward her. "What does that mean?" The old woman touched the dripping glass lightly. In the old stories, the river ice was never ordinary ice. No one interrupted. Marta's voice trembled softly. They believed the thing beneath the valley could only rise during certain winters. Cold winters. Long winters. Outside, the wind groaned against the house walls. The ice was part of the prison. A terrible silence followed. Tomas suddenly remembered the river beneath the bridge earlier that morning. Chunks of ice floating loose, despite the freezing temperatures. Steam rising from black water. His stomach tightened. "It's melting." Marta nodded slowly. "And something below it is waking." A loud crash echoed somewhere downstairs. Everyone jumped violently. Another crash followed immediately after. Villagers screamed outside. Oren rushed from the room, with the others close behind. By the time they reached the lower floor, people were already stumbling backward out the front door in panic. "The river," someone shouted. Tomas burst outside into the snow-covered street. Dark smoke rose beyond the rooftops, near the southern edge of town. No, not smoke. Mist. Black mist rolling upward from the direction of the riverbanks. And beneath the terrible groaning wind came another sound. Cracking, massive cracking, like enormous sheets of glass, breaking somewhere beneath the earth. The crowd began running downhill toward the bridge despite their fear. Tomas followed, boots slipping through deep snow, while church bells suddenly erupted across the valley again. This time, nobody was ringing them. The bells swung wildly on their own. When they reached the river bank, the sight before them stopped everyone cold. The river Alvin was splitting open. A jagged crack stretched across the frozen surface from one side to the other. Black water churned violently beneath the ice, while steam rose into the air, and along the river banks stood figures, dozens of them, motionless, watching the town. At first, Tomas thought they were villagers gathering near the water. Then he realized something horrifying. The figures were soaking wet. Their clothing hung stiff with ice, and every single face belonged to someone missing. Elsa Weaver stood nearest the shore. Beside her stood Father Benrick, Elias Mercer, others too, men and women who had vanished years ago. Some looked freshly dead. Others appeared impossibly ancient, skin pale and stretched tight across bone. Nobody in the crowd moved. Nobody even breathed. The figures simply stared toward Velmora in silence. Then Elsa slowly lifted one hand and pointed toward the town. The cracked river ice groaned louder. A deep sound echoed upward from beneath the water. Not an animal sound, not human either. Something vast moving under the ice. People began screaming. The crowd scattered instantly, running through the snow in blind panic. Some fled uphill toward the church, while others barricaded themselves inside nearby homes. Tomas grabbed Marta's arm before she could fall. "We need to go." But the old woman kept staring toward the river. Tears filled her eyes. "They're not dead," she whispered. "What? The missing people." Her voice cracked. "They never died." A terrible roar exploded beneath the ice. The frozen river surface bulged upward violently, then shattered. Black water erupted skyward, while enormous chunks of ice crashed across the banks. Villagers screamed as freezing spray rained over the streets. Something moved beneath the surface. Huge, far too huge. Tomas only glimpsed part of it before the water swallowed it again. A pale shape, smooth like skin, and an eye, one massive dark eye, opening briefly beneath the river. The boy stumbled backward in horror. Marta grabbed his sleeve tightly. "Run!" This time he obeyed. The two of them fled uphill through chaos as bells rang wildly overhead. Doors slammed shut throughout town. Horses screamed from locked stables. The crows above the church tower burst into enormous spiraling clouds across the gray sky. Behind them, the river continued roaring. Tomas risked one glance backward while climbing the hill. The figures from the riverbank were walking now, slowly crossing into town. Elsa led them. Their soaked clothing trailed black water through the snow, while townspeople fled screaming from every direction. One villager near the bakery froze in terror as the dead figures approached him. Father Benrick reached the man first. The priest gently touched the villager's face. Instantly, the man went completely still, then calmly turned and began walking toward toward the river himself. Tomas nearly lost his footing. "They're taking people," Marta nodded grimly, while struggling uphill beside him. "The valley is gathering them." "Why?" But the old woman looked too frightened to answer. They reached the market square breathless. Panic consumed Velmora now. Families carried children through the streets, while others loaded wagons desperately. Some shouted about escaping through the mountain pass before nightfall. Mayor Oren stood near the fountain barking orders at armed guards. "The southern gate stays open. We can't leave," one man cried. "The roads are buried. Then dig them clear." Another scream echoed nearby. One of the wet figures had entered the square, a woman missing for nearly 10 years. Her pale face remained expressionless as she walked through the snowfall toward the crowd. People scattered instantly, but Oren stepped forward, gripping a hunting rifle. "Stop." The woman continued walking. Water dripped from her frozen dress. "Please," she whispered softly. Her voice sounded normal, almost gentle. "Come with us." Oren fired. The rifle blast exploded across the square. The woman collapsed backward into the snow. For one brief moment, silence filled the town. Then she slowly stood again. No blood emerged from the wound in her chest. Only black river water. Several villagers screamed openly now. The woman tilted her head strangely toward Oren. "You cannot stop the thaw." Then all the bells in Velmora stopped ringing at once. The sudden silence felt worse than the noise. Snow drifted quietly through the square, and from somewhere, beneath the town itself, came a low, trembling sound. The ground began shaking. People lost balance immediately. Roof tiles slid into the streets. Horses shrieked in terror, while cracks spread through nearby walls. Tomas grabbed the fountain edge tightly. The trembling intensified. Then came the sound, a deep cracking noise directly beneath the church hill. Everyone turned. The hill behind St. Edwin's Church had split open. Dark water burst upward through the earth itself, flooding across gravestones and icy pathways. Villagers fled downhill, while the church doors shuddered violently against their chains. Another tremor shook the valley. The chains snapped. The chapel doors slowly creaked open by themselves. Inside the darkness, beyond the entrance, candlelight flickered. Though no one had entered, Marta stared upward in horror. "It's calling them back." Who? But Tomas already knew. Across the square, the wet figures had stopped moving. Every single one now faced the church. Elsa smiled faintly. Then the drowned townspeople began walking uphill together toward the open chapel doors. The drowned figures climbed the church hill in complete silence. No one tried stopping them. The townspeople of Velmora stood frozen throughout the square, watching pale shapes move through the snowfall toward St. Edwin's Church. Water dripped from their clothing onto the icy ground behind them, leaving long black trails across the snow. Elsa Weaver walked at the front beside Father Benrick. The dead priest still held the broken wooden statue against his chest. The sight made Tomas feel sick. Mayor Oren slowly lowered the rifle in his trembling hands. "We have to leave," one villager whispered. Then another voice answered, "The roads are gone." Panic spread again immediately. Several men rushed toward the northern gate only to return moments later breathless and terrified. The mountain pass beyond Velmora had collapsed during the tremors. Snow and rock now buried the only safe road out of the valley. They were trapped. The realization passed through the crowd like cold poison. Women held crying children tightly, while others dragged supplies from abandoned homes. One farmer dropped to his knees, praying openly in the middle of the street. Above them, crows swirled across the sky in enormous black circles. Tomas stared toward the church hill. The drowned townspeople had nearly reached the chapel entrance now, and the candles inside the church burned brighter with every step they took. "Marta," Tomas whispered, "what happens if they get inside?" The old woman looked pale beneath the drifting snow. "I don't know," but her face said otherwise. Another tremor shook the valley. The church bell tower groaned loudly. Chunks of ice slid from nearby rooftops and shattered across the square. Then came the singing again. Not from beneath the river, this time. From inside the church itself. Hundreds of voices rising together beneath the candlelight. The drowned figures stopped walking. One by one, they turned toward the town, toward the living. Elsa lifted her head slowly. "Bring them," she whispered. Instantly, the drowned began moving downhill again. Faster now, the townspeople screamed. Chaos erupted across Velmora as the dead spread through the streets. Some moved calmly. Others staggered with strange, jerking motions, like puppets dragged by invisible strings. Wherever they touched someone, the victims stopped resisting. A baker reached for his missing daughter near the fountain. The drowned child embraced him gently. Then both turned together and walked silently toward the church. A woman tried pulling her husband away from Father Benrick. The dead priest simply touched the man's forehead. Immediately, the husband's terrified expression vanished. His face became calm, empty, and he too began walking uphill. "They're taking everyone," Tomas shouted. Mayor Oren snapped from his shock at last. "To the hall," he roared. "Get inside." The surviving villagers rushed toward the town hall, while armed guards attempted slowing the drowned with axes and rifles. Nothing worked. Bullets tore through bodies without blood. Axes buried into frozen flesh, only for the drowned to keep moving. One guard was seized near the bakery by two soaking figures. Tomas watched in horror as they dragged the screaming man toward the flooded streets below. The screaming stopped suddenly halfway there. When the guard stood again, he walked willingly beside them. Snow and black water mixed together across the town. Tomas helped Marta toward the hall entrance, while frightened villagers shoved desperately through the doors. Children cried. Lanterns swung wildly overhead. Behind them, St. Edwin's Church glowed atop the hill like a lighthouse in the storm. Mayor Orrin slammed the hall doors shut. Once dozens of survivors crowded inside. Bar them. Tables and benches were dragged across the entrance, while others sealed windows with wooden planks. The entire building shook with panic and shouting. How many are left? Where's my son? They took Clara. Quiet. Orrin's voice thundered through the hall. Slowly, the frightened noise faded. The mayor stood near the center of the room, breathing heavily. Snow melted across his coat onto the wooden floorboards. We stay together, he said. Nobody leaves alone. A man near the back shook his head wildly. They aren't dead, he whispered. I saw my brother. He looked at me. Another villager began sobbing quietly. Tomas scanned the room. Barely 40 people remained, out of more than 200. The realization settled over him like ice. Marta sat beside the fireplace, staring into the flames with hollow eyes. They're gathering souls, she murmured softly. Tomas knelt beside her. For what? The old woman hesitated, then finally answered. To open the river fully. A heavy silence followed. Mayor Orrin approached them slowly. You know more than you're saying. Marta looked up at him tiredly. I know what my grandmother told me. The fire crackled between them. She said the thing beneath the valley was never trapped here by accident. Tomas frowned. What does that mean? Marta swallowed hard. Long ago, before Velmora, before even Father Edwin arrived, people worshipped something beneath the river. Several nearby villagers listened now in fearful silence. They believed the valley spirit granted protection during winter. Food, warmth, safe passage through the mountains. Her voice grew quieter, but every gift demanded payment. Outside, something slammed against the hall doors. Everyone jumped. Another slam followed immediately. Wood splintered slightly near the hinges. Children screamed. Orrin signaled several men toward the entrance with axes. Hold them shut. The pounding continued. Slow, steady, not frantic, almost patient. Marta continued speaking anyway. The worshippers eventually realized the truth. The thing beneath the river did not protect them. Another slam echoed through the hall. It was feeding. The lantern flames flickered violently overhead. They tried sealing it beneath the ice, using holy symbols and iron bells. That became the church. Tomas slowly understood. The bells, they were never calling people to prayer, Marta whispered. They were keeping something asleep. Outside, the pounding stopped. Silence settled across the building again. No one relaxed. Then came footsteps. Hundreds of footsteps moving through the snow outside the hall. A terrified boy peeked through a crack in the shutters. Oh God! Tomas rushed toward him. Outside, the drowned townspeople stood surrounding the hall in complete silence. Dozens of pale figures staring upward at the windows. Among them stood missing villagers from years past. Some Tomas recognized from old portraits hanging inside homes. Others looked ancient beyond imagining. Their clothing belonged to different centuries, and behind them all, near the flooded street below the church hill, stood something enormous moving slowly through the mist. Only pieces appeared visible between the drifting snow, a pale shape, far too large to be human. The ground trembled slightly beneath each movement. Tomas stepped away from the window, breathing hard. "What is that?" No one answered. Outside, Elsa Weaver slowly approached the hall entrance. The little girl's pale face tilted upward toward the building. Then she spoke. "Open the doors." Her voice echoed strangely, as though many voices spoke through her at once. No one moved. Elsa smiled faintly. "It hurts less if you choose." Mayor Oren grabbed a lantern and stepped toward the barricaded entrance. "You're not Elsa anymore." The child's expression never changed. She still sings below. Cold spread through the room. She misses her mother. Elsa's mother collapsed sobbing beside the fireplace. The drowned child pressed one pale hand against the hall doors. Instantly, frost spread across the wood. Thick white ice crawled over the barricades and windows. People backed away in terror. "She's freezing the building," someone whispered. The lanterns dimmed. Breath fogged heavily through the hall now. Outside, all the drowned began humming together. The same endless melody from beneath the river. The walls vibrated softly with the sound. Cracks formed across the ceiling beams overhead. Then came a deep roar from somewhere beneath the valley. The floor lurched violently. People screamed as tables overturned, and lanterns crashed across the room. Outside the windows, black water suddenly burst upward through the streets. The river was flooding into Velmora, and through the shattered shutters Tomas finally saw it clearly for the first time. The thing beneath the ice, a massive pale shape, rising slowly through the floodwaters below the church hill. Smooth white skin stretched across something impossibly huge. Long limbs unfolding beneath the mist, and dozens of dark human faces pressed beneath its surface like trapped souls trying to scream through flesh. The creature rose higher through the flooded streets. People inside the hall screamed openly now. Some fell to their knees praying. Others backed against the walls, unable to tear their eyes away from the windows. Tomas stood frozen. The thing outside barely resembled anything human. Its pale body moved like something half-formed, constantly shifting beneath the black water pouring through Velmora. Long white limbs unfolded slowly from its sides, too many to count clearly in the storm and darkness. And beneath its skin, faces, human faces pressing outward from inside the creature, as though trapped beneath thin ice. Some mouths opened silently. Others appeared to weep. Tomas recognized several. Father Benrick, Elias Mercer, Elsa Weaver, dozens more. The creature's enormous shape scraped against buildings, as it moved uphill toward the church. Roofs collapsed beneath its weight, while black floodwater spread through the streets behind it. Marta covered her mouth in horror. "The Hollow King," she whispered. Mayor Oren turned sharply toward her. "You know its name." The old woman nodded weakly. "My grandmother spoke of it once when I was a child. I thought it was only an old valley tale." Another tremor shook the building. Outside, the drowned continued humming softly around the hall. The Hollow King paused in the center of the flooded square below the church hill. Slowly, all the faces beneath its skin turned upward toward St. Edwin's Church. The candles inside the chapel suddenly flared brighter. Then the church bells rang again. Not wildly this time. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Each toll echoed across the valley like a heartbeat. Boom, boom, boom. The Hollow King answered with a low sound from deep within its massive body. Not a roar, a voice. Thousands of whispers layered together beneath the water. The townspeople inside the hall clutched their ears in pain. Tomas felt the sound vibrating through his chest. It was speaking, calling, and somewhere inside those whispers, he thought he heard names. The names of everyone still alive in Velmora. Elsa's pale voice rose outside the doors again. "It remembers you." The frost covering the hall walls thickened rapidly now. Ice crawled across the windows until only pale shadows remained visible beyond the glass. One of the children began crying uncontrollably. "We're going to die." Mayor Oren gripped the boy's shoulders firmly. "Listen to me. Panic gets us killed faster." But fear had already consumed the room. Several villagers whispered angrily among themselves near the back. This happened because the sacrifices stopped. "No," another replied. "The priest angered it. We should give it someone." The hall fell silent. Tomas stared at them in disbelief. "You can't be serious." An older farmer stepped forward shakily. "If one life keeps the valley closed." "It won't," Marta snapped suddenly. Everyone turned toward her. The old woman rose slowly beside the fire. Her voice no longer sounded frightened, only tired. That was the lie. Snow and floodwater rattled against the hall walls outside. The Hollow King never wanted one sacrifice every 13 years. She looked toward the frozen windows. It wanted obedience. Silence followed. Each offering made it stronger. Marta continued quietly. Every soul fed the thing beneath the ice. Mayor Oren clenched his jaw. Then how do we stop it? For the first time since Tomas had known her, Marta looked uncertain. "I don't know." Outside, the humming stopped. Complete silence returned once more. That silence frightened Tomas more than the screams had. Slowly, carefully, he approached one frozen window and wiped frost from the glass with his sleeve. The drowned townspeople were gone. Only empty, snow-covered streets remained beyond the hall. Tomas frowned. They disappeared. Several others rushed toward the windows. The square outside stood deserted. No drowned figures. No Elsa. Even the floodwaters had grown strangely still. Mayor Oren looked uneasy. Where did they go? Then came the sound. A long creaking groan from directly above them. Everyone looked upward. The ceiling beams bent slightly inward. Snow drifted down between cracks. Another groan echoed overhead. Marta's eyes widened. The roof. Too late. The ceiling exploded downward. Ice and shattered timber crashed into the hall. As enormous pale, limbs tore through the roof from above. People screamed. Lanterns burst apart. The Hollow King had climbed onto the building. Tomas barely avoided falling debris before the creature's massive arm smashed through the center of the room. The limb looked almost human, except for its impossible length, and smooth white flesh stretched tight across moving faces trapped beneath the skin. One trapped mouth suddenly opened near Tomas. "Help us," it whispered. The boy stumbled backward in horror. Panic consumed the hall entirely now. Villagers fled in every direction, while the creature tore wider openings through the roof. Black water poured inside, alongside snow and broken wood. Mayor Oren grabbed Tomas violently. To the cellar. The survivors rushed toward a narrow stairway beneath the hall, while the Hollow King ripped apart the upper floor overhead. Screams echoed behind them. Tomas glanced back once before descending. One elderly man had become trapped beneath fallen beams. A pale hand from the creature reached slowly toward him. The trapped man stopped screaming instantly, then calmly stood up on broken legs and walked directly into the creature's grasp. His body vanished beneath the white flesh. Another face appeared beneath the creature's skin moments later. Still screaming silently, Tomas nearly vomited. Mayor Oren slammed the cellar door shut behind the survivors. Darkness swallowed them, except for 2 remaining lanterns. The cellar smelled of damp earth and mold. People huddled together, breathing hard, while crashes thundered overhead. The Hollow King continued tearing the hall apart above them. Dust drifted from the ceiling with every impact. "We can't stay here," someone whispered. Oren nodded grimly. "There's an old tunnel." Marta looked up sharply. "The river tunnel." The mayor nodded. "It leads beneath the western cliffs." Fear crossed Marta's face instantly. "No, we don't have another choice." The old woman grabbed his arm tightly. "That tunnel goes beneath the church hill." Another violent crash shook the cellar. Wood splintered overhead. "We stay here and die," Oren replied. The survivors exchanged terrified glances. Finally, Tomas spoke. "What's in the tunnel?" Nobody answered immediately. Then Marta whispered, "The oldest part of Velmora." The lantern flames flickered weakly, while the mayor pulled aside several broken crates near the rear cellar wall. Beneath them lay a rusted iron hatch partly buried beneath dirt and stones. Oren strained to pull it open. A blast of freezing air rose from below, and with it came the distant sound of flowing water. The tunnel descended into darkness beneath the town. One by one, the survivors climbed downward, carrying lanterns, while the hall above continued collapsing beneath the Hollow King's weight. Tomas followed Marta carefully down slippery stone steps. The hatch slammed shut above them. Darkness deepened instantly. The tunnel below looked ancient, far older than the town itself. Stone walls curved overhead, covered in faded carvings, nearly erased by moisture and time. Strange symbols spiraled across the rock in patterns Tomas could not understand. Then he noticed the statues, small stone figures lining the tunnel walls every few feet. Each depicted human shapes kneeling with their mouths open toward the ground, as though feeding something beneath them. The survivors moved silently through ankle-deep water, while distant rumbling echoed from above. Tomas carried one lantern near the front beside Marta. "What is this place?" The old woman touched one of the ancient carvings lightly. "This was here before Velmora." Her voice trembled. "Before the church." The tunnel curved downward, gradually, beneath the earth, and the farther they walked, the warmer the air became. That frightened Tomas more than the darkness, because winter still raged above them. Yet here beneath the valley, the stones felt warm enough to melt ice. Then, somewhere ahead in the darkness, a child began singing softly. The singing came from ahead of them in the tunnel, soft at first, almost gentle, a child's voice echoing through stone corridors that should have been silent for centuries. The survivors stopped immediately. Lantern light trembled across the tunnel walls, while water rippled at their feet. Tomas felt his throat tighten. Marta raised a shaking hand. "Don't answer it," she whispered, but the voice continued anyway. Closer now, clearer, a lullaby, the same melody they had heard beneath the river, and inside the church, and across the town, before everything fell apart. Mayor Oren stepped forward slowly, gripping his lantern. "Who's there?" he called out. The singing stopped. Silence returned for a single heartbeat. Then, Tomas. His name echoed softly through the tunnel. Tomas froze. That voice again. Elsa Weaver. Behind him, several villagers began whispering in fear. "It knows us. It's calling us one by one." Marta grabbed Tomas's wrist tightly. "Do not go forward." But the boy was already shaking, because the voice sounded closer than before. Too close, as if standing just beyond the next bend. Oren raised his hand, signaling the group to stay behind him. Slowly, carefully, he advanced through the narrow passage while dripping water echoed loudly in the silence. The tunnel curved sharply ahead. Lantern light spilled around the corner and revealed a small stone chamber. Everyone stopped. Inside the chamber stood Elsa Weaver. Dry, completely dry. No water, no frost. Just a pale child standing in the center of an underground room, carved with ancient symbols. She turned her head slightly toward them and smiled. Marta whispered behind Tomas. "That's not possible." Elsa tilted her head. "You followed the river down," she said softly. "That's good." Orin stepped forward, voice tense. "What do you want?" Elsa blinked slowly. "We're almost home." Tomas felt a sudden cold rush through his body. "Home," he whispered. The child's smile widened slightly. Under the ice, the chamber began to tremble faintly. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and then the walls behind Elsa began to move. Not crumble, move, like something breathing beneath stone. Marta's voice broke. "Get back." But it was too late. The tunnel behind them shook violently. A distant roar echoed upward through the earth. The Hollow King had followed them down. The survivors turned in panic as the tunnel entrance collapsed behind them, sealing their only escape. Stone and dust filled the air. They were trapped. Orin spun back toward Elsa. "This ends here." He raised his rifle. Elsa didn't move, didn't even blink. "You can't kill what's already inside the valley," she said quietly. Orin fired. The gunshot echoed through the chamber. Elsa's small body fell backward onto the stone floor. Silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then Tomas stepped forward hesitantly. "She's gone." Marta shook her head slowly. "No." A wet sound echoed from beneath the chamber floor, like something shifting under deep water. Elsa's body twitched once, then again. Her head turned sideways unnaturally, and she smiled from the ground. Blood did not come from the wound. Only black river water seeped out instead, spreading across the carved symbols beneath her. The symbols began to glow faintly. One by one, Orin stepped back in horror. "What is this place?" Marta stared at the glowing carvings. The root. The root of what? She swallowed. The thing beneath the valley isn't just under the river. The chamber trembled harder now. It is the valley. A deep groan echoed through the stone, from everywhere at once. Above them, below them, inside the walls. Elsa's body slowly rose again without effort, as if pulled upward by invisible hands. Her broken expression remained calm. Behind her, the carved symbols lit brighter, and the chamber floor began to crack open, a thin line splitting stone. Then another. Water started rising through the cracks. Black water, warm, alive. Orin shouted. "We move." But there was nowhere left to run. The tunnel behind them was sealed. The chamber ahead was breaking open. Tomas stepped back as the cracks widened rapidly beneath his feet. And then he saw it. Through the opening floor, something vast beneath them. Not a creature fully visible, but a presence, a shifting mass of lightless movement, pressing upward against the stone, like something pushing through a thin skin. Dozens of voices rose together from below, not singing now, speaking, saying the same thing over and over. "Open, Open, open. Marta fell to her knees. It's not beneath the river, she whispered again, tears in her eyes. It is the river. The floor exploded upward. Stone shattered. Black water erupted into the chamber as the barrier finally broke, and something began to rise through Velmora's deepest foundations. Black water flooded the chamber in a violent surge. The survivors were thrown backward as the stone floor collapsed inward, breaking apart like thin ice under too much weight. Lanterns spun through the air and shattered against the walls, plunging the tunnel into flickering darkness. Tomas hit the ground hard, breath knocked out of him. When he looked up, the chamber was no longer a chamber. It was opening. The floor had become a widening wound in the earth, pouring out river water that should never have reached this depth. The carved symbols along the walls burned brighter, pulsing like veins under skin. Elsa stood at the edge of the collapsing stone, perfectly still. Behind her, the Hollow King's presence pressed closer through the tunnel walls. Every vibration grew heavier, slower, more deliberate. Orin dragged himself up first, coughing. "We leave now," he shouted. But there was nowhere left to go. The tunnel entrance was sealed behind falling rock. The only path forward was down into the widening rupture. Marta crawled to Tomas's side, gripping his arm tightly. "This is what it wanted," she said, voice shaking. It was never trapped. It was only waiting for the right opening. Another crack split the chamber. Water erupted higher, and from beneath it came sound. Not singing this time. Breathing. Slow, deep, endless. The Hollow King was directly beneath them now. The ground beneath Elsa fractured completely. She stepped backward into the rising water without fear, as if it were solid ground. Tomas stared in disbelief. How is she still alive? Marta's eyes were fixed on the glowing symbols. "She isn't," she whispered. Elsa turned her head toward them one last time, and for a brief moment, her expression changed. Not fear, not sadness, recognition, like something inside her briefly surfaced. "Tomas," she said softly again. The boy froze. This time her voice was different, less layered, more human. "I'm sorry." The water surged upward violently. Elsa disappeared beneath it, and the chamber collapsed fully. Stone gave way completely as the floor vanished into a vast opening beneath the valley. The survivors were thrown toward the edge, scrambling desperately for purchase as the entire structure broke apart. Tomas grabbed a jagged stone ledge with both hands. Below him, the world opened. Not a tunnel, not a cavern, a massive hollow space beneath Velmora, lit faintly by the glow of shifting symbols embedded in ancient stone structures far below. And in the center of it, the Hollow King, fully visible now, immense beyond comprehension. A pale, shifting mass shaped like something once human, but never meant to remain so. Its body was not fixed. It moved continuously, as if reality could not agree on its form. Faces lined its surface in endless layers, thousands of them, villagers, travelers, children, priests, all pressed beneath translucent skin, mouthing silent screams. And at its core, something darker pulsed, a heart made of flowing river water, black, endless, alive. The creature rose slowly through the cavern, lifting itself toward the broken chamber above. Oren hung from the edge nearby, shouting orders that no one could hear over the roaring water. We climb now. 2 villagers slipped and vanished instantly into the rising flood below. Their screams cut off as they were pulled into the mass beneath the hollow king. Marta pulled herself closer to Tomas. "We can't outrun it," she said. Tomas looked down at the impossible thing rising beneath them. "What do we do then?" The old woman's voice was barely audible. "We end the river." Another tremor shook the cavern. Chunks of stone broke loose and fell into the darkness. The hollow king continued rising, slowly, patiently, like something that knew it had already won. Then, unexpectedly, the glowing symbols across the cavern walls shifted, the same ones carved into the tunnel, the same ones in Elsa's chamber. They began to move, realigning, reacting. Marta's eyes widened. "No, it's still active." Oren looked at her. "What is?" "The seal," she whispered. "It was never meant to hold it forever, only to delay it until the valley accepted the truth." A violent roar erupted beneath them. The hollow king surged upward faster now, as if responding to her words. The water rose with it, flooding the broken chamber completely. Tomas felt his grip slipping. Marta shouted over the chaos. "The river is the boundary. If it breaks fully." She didn't finish, because at that moment, the hollow king reached the edge of the broken chamber. Its massive presence pressed upward, filling the entire space beneath them, and all the faces inside. It turned upward at once, looking directly at the survivors, recognizing them, calling them. Tomas felt something inside his mind fracture slightly. A whisper entered his thoughts. Not words, an invitation. "Come down." His fingers began to slip from the ledge. Oren was screaming something nearby, but the sound felt distant now. The water rose higher, and below, the hollow king opened something like a mouth across its entire shifting body. Waiting. Tomas looked at Marta one last time. Her expression was no longer fearful, only resigned. Then she said softly, "If it rises, the valley becomes it." The stone beneath them cracked again, and everything began to fall. The stone finally gave way. There was no dramatic break this time, no warning loud enough to prepare anyone. Just a sudden surrender of ancient rock that had been holding back something far older than Velmora itself. Tomas fell. Air vanished around him. Cold, black water rushed upward to meet him mid-drop, swallowing sound and light in a single instant. For a moment, there was nothing but pressure. then pain, then silence. He opened his eyes beneath the surface. The world had changed completely. The chamber above no longer existed as separate space. Everything was now part of the same endless flood: stone, tunnel, broken structures, and the Hollow King itself dissolving into one vast, submerged reality. Tomas tried to move his arms. His body felt heavy, dragged downward by currents that didn't behave like water should. They pulled in different directions at once, as if the river itself was thinking. Shapes drifted past him, not debris. People, villagers floating in the dark, eyes open, mouths moving silently. Some recognized him. Some reached out. None were truly alive anymore. A shadow passed overhead, enormous and slow. Tomas turned his head. The Hollow King moved through the submerged cavern like a continent awakening, now fully expanded beneath Velmora. It no longer needed shape to exist. Its body was the water, the stone, the space between them. Faces drifted across its surface like memories trapped in liquid glass, and it was rising still, not upward, not downward, outward, expanding into everything. Tomas kicked desperately, trying to push himself toward the broken stone edge, where faint light still filtered through cracks. His lungs burned. The pressure inside his chest tightened like iron. Something grabbed his ankle. He twisted in panic. A hand, human, but pale and too still. Orin, the mayor, was half submerged, struggling weakly against the current. His eyes met Tomas's. No words, only fear. Then behind Orin, something darker moved. A cluster of drowned figures drifted closer, their motion synchronized like a single organism. They surrounded the mayor slowly, gently. Orin tried to scream. No sound came out. The drowned touched him, and just like before, his expression changed. Fear vanished. Resistance stopped. His body turned calmly toward the Hollow King, and he began to drift downward. Tomas kicked harder, breaking free from the current pulling him in. He pushed toward the cracked stone wall, scraping his hands against jagged rock, until he finally found a narrow gap where air still existed, an air pocket trapped beneath collapsed stone. He pulled himself inside. Coughing violently, he collapsed against the rock, breathing barely. Above him, through the fractured opening, the cavern was still alive with motion. The Hollow King had stopped rising. Now it was spreading, slowly filling the entire underground system beneath Velmora like ink seeping through paper. Marta appeared nearby, pulling herself into the same air pocket with shaking arms. Her face was pale, lips trembling. "It's not rising to the surface," she whispered. Tomas gasped between breaths. "What then?" Marta stared upward. "It's becoming the valley." A low vibration passed through the stone around them. Not a sound, a feeling, as if the earth itself had started breathing. Above, the remaining structures collapsed one by one into the flood. Entire tunnels dissolved into shifting darkness. The Hollow King no longer needed to move physically through space. It simply existed everywhere the water touched. And then Tomas saw Elsa again, not as a body, not as a child, but as a reflection moving through the water's surface. Her face appeared briefly in the black current beside them. Calm, watching. Tomas froze. Elsa, her reflection turned toward him, and for the first time, her voice came without distortion. "You can still leave," she said softly. Marta shook her head violently. "It's lying." But Elsa's reflection did not react. "It doesn't want all of you," she continued. "Only what remains tied to the surface." Tomas frowned. "What does that mean?" The water around them pulsed gently, and for a moment, the Hollow King's presence seemed to pause. Listening, Elsa's reflection looked directly at Tomas. "You are not fully inside yet." A silence followed. Then Marta whispered in realization. "The tunnel air pockets there the last boundary." The ground trembled again. Cracks widened even in their small shelter. Water began seeping inside. Slowly, patiently, Tomas looked at the rising level with growing panic. "We can't stay here." Elsa's reflection remained steady. "There is one way," she said. Marta's voice sharpened. No more bargains." But Elsa ignored her. "The river remembers the first seal," she said. "Not the church, not the sacrifices. The first stone." Tomas blinked. "What stone?" The reflection of Elsa tilted her head slightly. "The one placed before the valley learned hunger." A distant roar rolled through the flooded caverns. The Hollow King shifted again. Faster now. Agitated, the water surged higher into their air pocket. Marta grabbed Tomas urgently. "If there is a first seal, it's beneath the old foundations, beneath everything." Tomas looked at her. "You mean deeper?" She nodded. "Deeper than the church, deeper than Velmora, the original boundary." Elsa's reflection began fading. Her final words echoed softly. "It is still there." Then she was gone. The water rose to Tomas's chest. The Hollow King's presence pressed closer, filling the space outside their fragile refuge. Marta made a decision. "We go down." Tomas stared at her in disbelief. Down, there's nowhere lower. But she was already pushing herself toward a narrow fissure in the stone floor, where water was draining slowly into darkness beneath. A hidden passage, older than the tunnels, older than Velmora, a place no one had seen in centuries. The Hollow King surged violently above them. The entire cavern shook, and the last remaining barrier beneath Velmora began to open. The fissure beneath them widened with a slow, grinding sound, like stone being remembered after centuries of silence. Water didn't just drain into it. It answered it. A downward pull formed instantly, as if whatever lay below had been waiting the entire time for the seal above to weaken. Tomas felt it in his bones before he saw it. A deep, unnatural gravity, dragging everything toward that narrow opening in the floor. Marta dropped to her knees beside it, pressing her hand against the edge. "It's still intact," she whispered. Tomas looked over her shoulder. The passage below wasn't a tunnel carved by human hands. It was something older, stone walls too smooth, too deliberate, as if shaped by pressure rather than tools. Black water flowed into it without splashing, vanishing into a darkness that didn't reflect light at all. Above them, the Hollow King shifted again. The cavern trembled violently. Chunks of stone broke loose and disappeared into the flood with hollow echoes. The pressure of its presence pushed harder, closer, as if it had realized they had found a path it could not easily follow. Tomas turned to Marta. "If we go down there, we don't know what's waiting." Marta's expression was hollow, exhausted beyond fear. "We already know what's waiting above." A loud, distant crack thundered through the cavern. The Hollow King was collapsing sections of the underground world into itself, consuming space faster now, as though the entire valley was becoming one continuous body. The water level surged again. Tomas didn't hesitate anymore. He dropped into the fissure. Cold swallowed him instantly. The descent was not like falling. It was like being pulled through layers of pressure and memory. The passage twisted downward in ways that made no sense, turning without angles, bending without structure. Marta followed close behind. The moment they entered, the sound of the cavern above vanished completely. No roaring, no collapsing stone, only a deep, constant vibration beneath them, as if something enormous was breathing through the earth. They slid through darkness for what felt like far too long, until suddenly the passage widened into a massive underground chamber. Tomas hit shallow water and stumbled forward, catching himself against a stone pillar. Marta landed beside him moments later. They both looked up and froze. The chamber was not empty. It was built. Perfectly symmetrical stone structures rose from the ground in concentric circles, each layer older than the last. Carvings covered every surface, older than the symbols in the church, older than the river tunnels, older than Velmora itself. At the center stood something impossible, a monolith, massive, black, smooth like glass, but not reflective. It did not look carved. It looked placed. Marta's breath shook. "This is it," she whispered. Tomas stepped closer. The air here was different, dry, still, almost warm despite the flooding world above. The monolith hummed faintly, not with sound, but with pressure against the mind, and carved into its base was a single marking, not a language, a warning, a boundary, the first seal. Tomas touched it lightly. The moment his fingers made contact, the chamber reacted. The water behind them stopped moving, completely, like time itself had paused in hesitation. Then the monolith answered. A deep pulse spread through the chamber. Not sound, recognition. Marta stepped closer, her voice barely audible. It knows we're here. Above them, far away, something roared. But it was different now. Angrier, confused. The Hollow King was pressing against this place, but not entering it. For the first time, Tomas understood. This is outside it, he said quietly. Marta nodded. The original boundary. Whatever sealed it first didn't trap it in the river. It trapped it from the world asterisk. The monolith pulsed again, and this time, a crack appeared across its surface. Tomas stepped back instantly. No, but it was already happening. The first seal was failing, and something on the other side of it was noticing. A pressure built in the chamber, not water, not wind, but presence. The feeling of something immense pressing its attention against the stone, like an eye opening for the first time in centuries. Marta backed away slowly. We're not supposed to be here, she whispered. Tomas stared at the cracking monolith. Then what happens if it breaks? Marta didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't theoretical anymore. It was happening. A second crack spread across the monolith, then another, and from deep inside the stone came a sound. Not the Hollow King, something older, something that did not belong to the valley, or the river, or even the world they knew. A voice without language, just intent, recognition, and hunger. The chamber lights dimmed, as if the stone itself was losing memory. The water above them began to stir again, violently this time, as the Hollow King reacted to something deeper awakening below. Marta grabbed Tomas' right quote, S-arm tightly. We leave now. But Tomas didn't move, because he understood something in that moment. The Hollow King was not the end. It was only what the valley had become asterisk after the first seal weakened. And now, the first seal was breaking again. The monolith cracked a third time. This time, it didn't sound like stone breaking. It sounded like something exhaling after a very long sleep. A deep, layered vibration rolled through the chamber, and every carved circle in the floor responded at once. Faint lines of light, crawling through ancient grooves, like veins, remembering how to move. Marta pulled Tomas backward hard. We are not staying here, she hissed. But Tomas could not look away. The monolith was no longer just cracking. It was opening asterisk, not outward, but inward, like a shell peeling back into something that had been hidden inside it the entire time. A thin slit of darkness appeared at its center. No light reflected from it. No water touched it. It simply existed. And from inside that slit, something began to notice them. Tomas felt it first as pressure behind his eyes, a sense of being observed, not from a direction, but from everywhere at once. Marta staggered slightly. Her voice broke. It's awake. Above them, far beyond the chamber, the Hollow King reacted violently. A distant, thunderous roar echoed through layers of stone and water. The entire underground structure trembled, as if the creature above had suddenly become uncertain of its own shape. It pressed harder against the world, but for the first time, it did not advance. It hesitated. Tomas swallowed. "It's afraid." Marta shook her head immediately. "No," she whispered. "It remembers." The slit in the monolith widened another fraction, and then the chamber changed. The carvings on the walls began to shift, not physically, but perceptually, as if the meaning of the symbols was rewriting itself in real time inside the mind. Tomas stumbled back. The ground beneath him felt wrong now, like standing on the surface of something that was not meant to be observed directly. A voice formed not through sound, but through thought forced into shape. Not words, understanding, boundary failing. Marta dropped to her knees. "Don't listen to it," she said desperately, covering her ears as if that could help. "Don't let it take meaning from you." But Tomas was already hearing it, not as speech, as knowledge being inserted into his mind. Images flickered behind his eyes. A valley before Velmora. No town, no river as they knew it. Only a vast, sealed basin of stone and frozen water, with something enormous beneath it, held in place by structures that were never built by human hands. Then another image. The first seal. Not a church, not a ritual. A massive stone structure placed into the earth while the ground was still forming, locking something beneath the world itself, not in it. And then the Hollow King, not a creature born beneath the river, but something formed when the boundary weakened, and the pressure of what lay beneath began leaking into the world above. A correction, not a monster. A symptom. Tomas gasped, clutching his head. "It's not just one thing," he whispered. Marta looked at him sharply. "What are you seeing?" He struggled to speak through the pressure in his mind. "The Hollow King. It's not the original." The monolith cracked again. This time, a sound came from it. A real sound, like stone screaming softly. The slit widened enough now that darkness inside it seemed to move independently, swirling like a slow eye opening in reverse. And from that opening, something responded. Not a body, not a shape, a will. The chamber lights dimmed further, as if the concept of illumination was being reduced. Above them, the Hollow King's presence surged again, this time not toward them, but away, as if retreating from something it could sense beneath. It was no longer the dominant force in the valley. Tomas realized that, with growing horror, something below the monolith was. Marta stood slowly, trembling. "We have to collapse it," she said. Tomas turned toward her. "How?" She looked at the glowing rings beneath their feet. The seal wasn't just stone. It was anchored through the valley layers. If we break the core point, the monolith suddenly pulsed. Hard, the entire chamber shook violently. The slit expanded another inch, and a soundless pressure hit both of them like a wave. Marta cried out and fell backward. Tomas dropped to one knee, barely holding himself upright. And then the voice changed. It was no longer fragmented understanding. It became focused, directed, Tomas. His name, clear, absolute. He froze. Marta looked up at him in alarm. Don't respond. But it was too late. The presence inside the monolith had already chosen him. Images surged again, but now they were personal. Velmora before it fell, the river before it darkened, the sacrifices, the faces, Elsa Weaver standing at the edge of black water, Father Benrick holding the broken statue, and then Tomas himself standing at the riverbank, watching, not participating, just being there. A realization formed in his mind that did not belong to him. The boundary did not only fail because of the valley, it failed because people kept remembering it wrong. The monolith pulsed again. The slit widened, and from deep within it, something began to press outward, not yet visible, but close enough that the water in the chamber started to rise again, reacting to its emergence. Marta grabbed Tomas violently. We leave. Now, whatever this is, it's not waiting anymore. Tomas looked at the monolith one last time and understood something terrifyingly simple. The Hollow King had been the surface consequence, but what was inside the seal had been asterisk waiting for the seal to break completely before it ever showed itself. And now it was seconds away. Tomas turned sharply. Run! And they fled through the shaking chamber as the first seal finally gave way behind them. They ran, not carefully, not strategically, just instinctively, because the moment Tomas turned away from the monolith, the chamber behind them changed in a way that made staying impossible. The air itself felt thinner, as if the space they were standing in was losing permission to exist. Stone groaned under unseen pressure. The carved rings across the floor began to fracture in sequence, like something following an ancient pattern of release. Marta grabbed Tomas's arm and pulled him through a narrow archway at the edge of the chamber. Don't look back, she shouted. But Tomas did anyway. Just once, the monolith was no longer a monolith. The central slit had widened into a vertical seam of absolute darkness, stretching from floor to ceiling. And within it, something blinked, not an eye in the human sense, but a recognition, as if the world had finally been noticed by something that had been ignoring it for a very long time. Tomas stumbled forward immediately. Marta shoved him harder. Move. Behind them, the chamber collapsed inward. Not outward destruction, inward reversal, like reality folding back into itself to hide what was no longer supposed to be seen. They burst through a narrowing corridor as stone cracked and shifted behind them. The tunnels that once felt ancient now felt temporary, like they were being rewritten as they ran through them. The Hollow King's distant presence was gone, completely, not defeated, not destroyed, just irrelevant. That realization chilled Tomas more than anything else, because something had replaced it. The tunnel twisted violently, forcing them upward through unstable stone passages. Water began rushing back in the opposite direction, pulled by forces deeper below. Marta slipped once, catching herself against the wall. "We're too close," she gasped. "Close to what?" Tomas shouted back. But she didn't answer, because she was listening. The sound had returned, not from behind them, from everywhere. A low, layered hum building through the stone itself. Not a creature moving, a system activating, the valley responding. The tunnel suddenly opened into a fractured vertical shaft. Above them, faint light flickered through cracks, real daylight, distant and weak. Marta pointed upward. There, they climbed. Tomas dug his fingers into wet stone, hauling himself up as debris fell around them. Every movement felt like the world was resisting their escape. Below them, the tunnels began to collapse in organized sequences. Not chaotic destruction, structured closure, like doors shutting. Marta climbed beside him, breathing hard. "It's not chasing us," she said between gasps. Tomas didn't look down. "Then what is it doing?" Marta's voice broke slightly. "It's separating." The shaft narrowed as they climbed, forcing them closer together. Cold air grew stronger above them, carrying the first trace of surface wind. Tomas could almost smell snow again. But then the sound changed. The hum beneath them deepened into something more intentional, and from far below, a single pulse traveled upward through the shaft. Marta froze mid-climb. Tomas felt it too, a vibration that didn't move through stone. It moved through asterisk meaning. Every carved structure below them reacted at once. The valley was aligning itself. Marta looked down for the first time. Her face went pale. "No." Tomas followed her gaze. Deep below, through fractured stone and collapsing tunnels, something vast was reorganizing itself beneath Velmora. Not rising, not expanding, reconfiguring. The Hollow King had been only one layer of expression. Now that layer was dissolving, and beneath it, something far larger was assembling itself in the shape of the entire valley. Tomas whispered, barely able to speak. "What is it doing?" Marta shook her head slowly. "It's remembering what it is, without us inside it." A second pulse hit. Harder. The shaft above them cracked wider. Daylight spilled in more strongly now. They were close. So close. But below, the valley was waking fully. And for the first time since the beginning, Tomas understood the truth not as fear, not as myth, but as structure. Velmora was never a town beside a river. It was a lid, a pressure point, a temporary arrangement, and now it was being removed. Marta pulled herself up the last section of stone with desperate strength. Tomas, don't stop. He followed, fingers bleeding against the rock. The opening above widened. Snowlight, air, surface, freedom. They broke through the final edge together and collapsed onto frozen ground outside. Cold wind hit them instantly. Real wind, real sky. Tomas gasped, rolling onto his back, staring upward at clouds moving across a normal winter morning, as if nothing had ever gone wrong anywhere below. Marta lay beside him, trembling violently. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Tomas sat up slowly. "We made it," he whispered. Marta didn't answer. She was staring back toward the broken earth behind them, the ground where Velmora should have been. But there was no valley opening, no river collapse, no town, just snow-covered land stretching quietly into the distance, as if nothing had ever existed beneath it at all. Tomas frowned. What happened to it? Marta Wright's voice was barely audible. It sealed itself again. He turned sharply toward her. What do you mean, again? But she was already standing, looking shaken in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. The valley didn't die, she said softly. It corrected itself. A long silence followed. Then Tomas asked the question he didn't want to hear the answer to. And Velmora? Marta looked at the empty snowfield. No one will remember it the same way twice. A cold wind swept across the plain, and somewhere far beneath their feet, far beyond stone, river, or memory, the world settled back into an uneasy stillness, as if something enormous had just finished adjusting itself and decided to wait again. Tomas sat in the snow long after Marta stopped speaking. The wind had picked up again, carrying thin needles of ice across the empty plain. It should have felt like escape. It should have felt like survival. But it didn't, because there was nothing behind them. No collapsed valley, no broken church hill, no flooded streets, just untouched winter land stretching in every direction. As if Velmora had never been anything more than a shared hallucination that winter itself had refused to remember. Tomas slowly turned his head. Marta, he said quietly, we were inside something. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt and pressed her hand into the snow. Then she rubbed it slowly between her fingers. Real, cold, normal. That made her look more afraid, not less. It's not gone, she whispered. Tomas frowned. What do you mean, we're out? Marta shook her head. No, we are out of it. She looked up at him with tired eyes. That's different. A long silence followed. The wind shifted slightly, dragging clouds across the pale sky. Tomas stood slowly, legs still unsteady from the climb. If Velmora is gone, he said, then where did everyone go? Marta hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncertain. I don't know if gone is the right word. Tomas turned toward the horizon. Nothing moved out there. No birds, no smoke, no roads, just snow and distant hills fading into white. Then faintly, a sound, so quiet he almost dismissed it as wind. But it was a bell, one slow toll. Tomas froze instantly. Marta heard it too. Her entire body went rigid. "That's not possible," she whispered. The bell rang again, far away, muffled, but real. Tomas turned slowly in the direction of the sound. "There's something over there." Marta grabbed his wrist. "No." Her grip tightened. "We don't follow bells anymore." Tomas looked at her. "But you heard it." She didn't answer. The bell rang a third time. Closer, not physically closer, but clearer, as if the sound itself was approaching them through layers of distance that didn't belong to geography anymore. Marta released his arm slowly. Her face had changed. Not fear now. Recognition. "We didn't leave it behind," she said softly. Tomas frowned. "What are you talking about?" Marta stepped back slightly. "The valley doesn't have edges." The wind grew quieter. Even the snow seemed to slow. The bell rang again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. Tomas looked around instinctively. The empty white landscape around them had begun to feel structured, not random anymore. Subtle lines in the snow started to align, shapes forming where there should have been none. Marta whispered. "It followed." Tomas shook his head. "No, we came out. We climbed out." But even as he said it, doubt crept in, because the horizon was no longer empty. Far in the distance, something dark stood against the white. A shape, impossible to judge size at that distance. Still, waiting, Tomas pointed. "Marta." She saw it immediately and went silent. The bell rang again, and the shape in the distance responded, not by moving, but by becoming more defined, more real, as if attention itself was giving it form. Tomas took a step forward, without meaning to. Marta grabbed him again, harder this time. "No," she said firmly. "Don't acknowledge it." Tomas swallowed. "What is it?" Marta right quote. S voice broke slightly. "I think it's the part that stayed above." Tomas frowned. "The Hollow King." She shook her head. "No." A pause. "Us." The wind finally returned. Cold, sharp, familiar. The bell stopped. The shape in the distance did not disappear. It simply stopped being uncertain. Tomas stared at it, unable to move. Marta pulled her coat tighter. "We didn't escape the valley," she said quietly. "We just changed which part of it we're standing in." A long silence followed. Then Tomas asked, barely audible, "Then what do we do now?" Marta looked at him for a long time, and for the first time since everything began, she gave a simple answer. "We walk." They began moving across the snow toward the distant shape. Behind them, no footprints remained for long. and somewhere far beneath the white ground, something enormous shifted again, patient, waiting, remembering that time, eventually, always circles back. They walked, not quickly, not slowly on purpose either, just in the way exhaustion forces a body to keep moving when standing still starts to feel worse than motion. The snow swallowed their footprints almost immediately. Each step they took behind them disappeared, as if the ground refused to acknowledge they had passed through it. Tomas noticed it first. He stopped once and looked back. There was no trail, no evidence, just untouched white stretching behind them, smooth and indifferent. "Marta," he said quietly. She didn't stop walking. "I know." The distant shape ahead remained unchanged, still dark against the pale horizon. But now, as they moved, it felt less like something they were approaching, and more like something that was gradually becoming aware of them. The wind shifted again, this time carrying no cold, just silence, a heavy, unnatural silence that made Tomas's ears ring. Marta slowed slightly. Her breathing became uneven. "I remember this place," she whispered. Tomas looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" But she didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed fixed forward. "I've never been here," she said slowly, "but I remember it." Tomas frowned. "That doesn't make sense." Marta finally stopped walking. The world around them seemed to pause with her. Even the wind softened. Even the snow seemed to hesitate before falling. She looked down at her hands. "They feel older than they should," she said. Tomas stepped closer. "Marta." Then she lifted her gaze past him, and her expression changed. Tomas turned. The shape ahead was closer now, not because they had walked toward it, but because distance itself had shortened. The dark form on the horizon had resolved into something more defined. A structure, tall, silent, half buried in snow, that swirled unnaturally around its base. Tomas felt his stomach tighten. "That wasn't there before," he said. Marta didn't respond. They continued forward again, but more cautiously now. The structure slowly revealed itself as they approached. Stone, ancient stone, not built like the church, not carved like human work. Something older, with angles that didn't follow natural design. A monolith-like ruin standing alone in the white field. And at its base, a single set of footprints. Fresh. Tomas stopped instantly. "Marta." She saw them too, but her reaction was worse than fear. It was recognition again, like a memory trying to surface through something blocking it. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." Tomas crouched beside the footprints. They were human, small, bare, leading directly toward the structure, then stopping, as if whoever made them had simply disappeared into the stone. A soft sound echoed behind them. The bell, one toll, closer again. Tomas stood quickly, scanning the empty field. "Marta, it's following us." But she wasn't listening anymore. She was walking toward the structure. Slowly, almost gently, Tomas grabbed her arm. "Stop." She turned toward him, and for a moment, her eyes looked unfamiliar. Not possessed, not changed, just misplaced, like someone remembering a life that didn't belong to them. "I think I've been here before," she said softly. Tomas shook his head. "No, you said you didn't." "I lied," she interrupted. Silence hit between them. The wind died again. Marta looked back at the stone structure. "I didn't want to remember it." Tomas felt a cold drop in his chest. "What is it?" Marta hesitated, then finally spoke. "The place where the first seal was made isn't beneath anything." A pause. "It's here." Tomas turned slowly toward the structure. The stone seemed darker now, not changing physically, just becoming more present, more certain, as if acknowledging them back. The bell rang again, but this time it didn't feel distant. It felt like it was coming from inside the monolith. Marta stepped forward. One step, then another. Tomas followed, unable to stop himself. The footprints at the base of the structure shimmered faintly as they approached, as if remembering they existed. Marta stopped directly in front of the stone. Her voice was barely audible. "I think we never left the boundary." Tomas looked at her. "What does that mean?" She placed her hand gently against the stone, and it responded, not with light, not with sound, but with recognition. A deep, slow pulse traveled through the structure, and somewhere far beyond the snowfield, something answered. The bell stopped. Complete silence returned. Then, from within the stone, a pressure formed again. Not breaking, not opening, realigning. Marta turned to Tomas one last time. Her expression was calm now. Too calm. "We didn't escape it," she said softly. "We carried it here." The stone behind her began to darken, and Tomas understood too late that the shape on the horizon was never the destination. It was the return point. The moment Marta said it, the stone reacted. Not violently, not immediately, but with a slow, patient certainty, like something long deferred had finally been given permission to continue. A low vibration passed through the monolith beneath her hand. Tomas stepped back instinctively. "Marta, get away from it." But she didn't move. Her palm stayed pressed against the surface, as if she could feel something answering her through it. Her breathing steadied, not in relief, in recognition. "I remember now," she whispered. Tomas frowned sharply. "What do you remember?" Marta's eyes stayed on the stone. The first time the seal was made, there were no priests. A pause. No towns. No names. Only people who agreed to forget themselves afterward. The wind around them disappeared completely. Even the snow stopped mid-fall for a fraction of a second, suspended like dust in frozen time. Tomas looked up nervously. "This isn't real," he said, more to himself than her. Marta shook her head gently. "It is real," she replied. "It just isn't finished yet." The monolith pulsed again, stronger this time, and the surface beneath her hand began to soften, not physically, but conceptually, like stone becoming uncertain of its own existence. Tomas rushed forward. "Pull your hand away." But Marta finally looked at him and smiled faintly, not peacefully, sadly. "I don't think I can." The stone beneath her fingers opened slightly, not like a door, like a thought being completed. A thin vertical line of darkness appeared again, familiar now, the same absence Tomas had seen in the chamber below Velmora. Only this time it was outside, on the surface, under the sky. The bell rang once. Tomas spun around instantly. The distant structure on the horizon had moved closer again, much closer, no longer a shape, now a presence, a widening distortion in the snowfield, as if the world itself was bending inward toward it. Tomas stepped back from Marta. "What is that thing?" he demanded. Marta didn't answer right away, because her attention was no longer fully here. Her voice came slower. "I think it isn't arriving." A pause. "It's remembering where it already is." The monolith behind her deepened its opening, and from that darkness, something began to press outward into the world above. Not the hollow king, not the valley, something without form, trying to become consistent enough to be perceived. The air around Tomas tightened painfully, like pressure dropping before a storm that doesn't need weather to exist. He fell to one knee. "Marta, please." She finally looked at him properly, and for the first time, there was fear again in her eyes. But it was too late to act on it. The monolith completed its opening. No explosion, no rupture, just a quiet correction in reality. And the world around them changed. The snowfield was no longer a snowfield. The sky was no longer a sky. Everything flattened into a single continuous space of pale light and dark depth, like being inside something that had never fully learned how to separate inside from outside. Tomas gasped. The bell rang again, but now it was everywhere. Inside him, around him, behind thought itself, and the structure on the horizon was suddenly no longer distant. It stood beside them, already there, always there. Marta took a slow step backward. Her voice was barely a whisper. "We didn't come out." A pause. "We moved to the edge of it." Tomas looked around wildly, trying to find something stable, anything that still obeyed normal distance or shape. Nothing did. The monolith behind them had vanished, or become unnecessary, because the boundary was no longer localized. It was everything, and from within that totality, something finally became distinct enough to be named. Not spoken, known. Tomas felt it settle into his mind, like weight. Not a creature, not a god, not even an entity in the normal sense. just a system completing its loop. The same thought, repeated endlessly beneath reality. Return. Marta closed her eyes, and when she spoke again, her voice was calm. I think this is where it always ends. Tomas shook his head violently. No, there has to be a way out. But even as he said it, he understood the truth forming around him. There was no out, only layers of being that had already been folded back into themselves. The bell rang one final time. Not loud, not distant, final, and the world stabilized into silence. Not peace, not death, just completion. Tomas stood alone in the stillness that had replaced everything, and somewhere beyond understanding, the valley continued existing exactly as it always had, waiting for the next time it would be remembered incorrectly again. Silence held for a long time, not the calm kind of silence that follows an ending, but the heavy kind that feels like something is still speaking, just no longer in a language the mind is allowed to translate. Tomas stood still, breathing, but uncertain if breath still meant anything in a place where even distance had lost meaning. Marta was no longer beside him. He turned slowly. Nothing, no footprints, no trace of where she had stood moments before. Only the pale expanse around him, too flat, too complete, like a surface that had forgotten how to contain separation. A thought pressed gently against the edge of his awareness. Not spoken, not forced, just present, still here. Tomas stumbled back. No. He looked around again, harder this time, trying to anchor something, anything to identity. The bell did not ring, but its absence felt like presence anyway, as if it no longer needed sound to be acknowledged. A shape formed in the distance again, not approaching, not retreating, just becoming noticeable in the way. A memory becomes unavoidable once it is remembered. Tomas clenched his fists. This isn't real, he whispered. No answer came, and then slowly, the space around him shifted, not dramatically, not violently, just reorganizing. The pale horizon softened, edges returned, snow reintroduced itself in faint, hesitant patterns. Wind reappeared like a concept being reapproved, and Tomas felt something deeply unsettling. Reality was rebuilding itself around him, not because it had been broken, but because it had been paused. A sound returned, soft at first, distant, a bell. Tomas froze. One toll, then another, closer again, but now properly distant, like it belonged somewhere with geography. The ground beneath his feet felt solid again. Cold, real. He looked down. Snow, footprints, his own. Marta's were gone, but something else remained. A faint indentation beside his, as if someone had stood there too briefly for the world to fully record them. The bell rang again, this time from a direction, a church direction. Tomas turned slowly. On the horizon, through the pale morning haze, a settlement stood. Small, familiar, smoke rising from chimneys, life moving, normality restored with disturbing precision. Velmora, or something shaped exactly like it. Tomas took a step forward, then another. The town did not react to him yet. It simply existed, waiting for alignment to complete. As he walked, a thought surfaced, not his own, but placed gently where his thoughts used to be. You were never gone. Tomas stopped. The bell rang again, a final confirmation, and somewhere deep beneath the illusion of distance, something vast settled back into patience. The valley was quiet again, not healed, not freed, just reset, waiting for the next time someone would walk too far, remember too much, or open something that was never meant to be understood all at once. Tomas began walking toward the town, and behind him, the snow filled in every trace of where anything unusual had ever happened. Tomas reached the edge of the town as morning fully settled. Velmora looked ordinary again. That was the worst part. People moved through the streets with steady purpose, carrying firewood, opening shutters, calling to one another across doorsteps. A baker pulled warm bread from an oven. A child ran past him laughing, slipping slightly on packed snow before being caught by her mother. Everything behaved as if it had always been this way, as if nothing had ever cracked beneath it. Tomas stood at the entrance of the square for a long time, waiting for something to feel wrong in a way that could be proven. Nothing did. The bell rang once from the church hill. Clear, measured, familiar. He walked forward slowly. Villagers passed him without reaction. Some nodded politely. Others did not notice him at all. There was no fear in their faces, no memory of drowning, no valley beneath them, just life continuing in the exact shape it was supposed to take. Tomas reached the market square. The fountain was intact, dry, normal, no frozen blood-black water, no footprints circling it in panic, no drowned procession emerging from its surface, just stone and silence and everyday movement. He looked toward the church hill. St. Edwin's Church stood above the town, weathered but stable. Crows circled lazily overhead, landing and taking off again like ordinary birds. No screaming, no warning, just sky. Tomas climbed the hill. Each step felt heavier than it should have, like walking through a memory that resisted being revisited. The church doors were open. Light streamed through stained glass in soft colors. Inside, villagers sat quietly on benches as Father Benrick moved slowly near the altar, speaking in a calm, measured voice about winter prayers and safe travel through the mountains. No darkness, no water, no cracked stone. Tomas stepped inside. A few heads turned briefly. Not fear, not recognition, just mild curiosity, like noticing a stranger entering from a different village. Father Benrick looked up. He smiled politely. "Good morning," he said. Tomas stood frozen. For a long moment, he studied the priest's face. No fractures, no terror, no drowning, just a man continuing his duties. Tomas opened his mouth. No words came, because every question he had felt suddenly unreasonable, like asking about a dream in the middle of daylight and expecting it to obey structure. The bell rang softly again. Father Benrick gestured gently toward a pew. "Would you like to sit?" Tomas hesitated, then slowly walked forward. As he sat down, the church felt warm, safe, familiar in a way that made everything else feel distant. A memory, not a place. Outside, snow drifted gently through Velmora, and far beneath everything, beneath thought, beneath structure, beneath numbing itself, something vast remained still. Not gone, not asleep, just correctly placed again. For now,